Hey guys, it's Miss Martinez. As you can see, I've changed my scenery. I love reading a book outside. It's one of my favorite things to do. So while you're watching this video, maybe go outside. If you have a hammock, lay in your hammock. Bring a beach towel out and listen to chapter 2 of Hatchet. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So chapter 2. For a time that he could not understand, Brian could do nothing. Even after his mind began working and he could see what had happened, he could do nothing. It was as if his hands and arms were lead. Then he looked for ways for it not to have happened. Be asleep, and his mind screamed at the pilot. Just be asleep and your eyes will open now and your hands will take the controls and your feet will move to the pedals. But it didn't happen. The pilot did not move except that his head rolled on a neck impossibly loose as the plane hit a small bit of turbulence. The plane. Somehow, the plane was still flying. Seconds had passed, nearly a minute, and the plane flew on as if nothing had happened, and he had to do something. Had to do something, but did not know what. Help! He had to help. He stretched one hand towards the pilot, saw that his fingers were trembling, and touched the pilot on the chest. He did not know what to do. And here's Bonnet. She's interested in what we're doing. Say hi, Bonnet. You can just lay here, honey. Lay down. He knew there were procedures that you could do mouth to mouth on victims of heart attacks and push their chests, CPR. But he did not know how to do it, and in any case, could not do it with the pilot, who was sitting up in the seat and still strapped in with his seatbelt. So he touched the pilot with the tips of his fingers, touched him on the chest, and could feel nothing. No heartbeat, no rise and fall of breathing, which meant that the pilot was most certainly dead. Please, Brian said, but did not know what or who to ask. Please. The plane lurched again, hit more turbulence, and Bryant felt the nose drop. It did not dive, but the nose went down slightly, and the down angle increased the speed, and he knew that at this angle, the slight angle down, he would ultimately fly into the trees. He could see them ahead on the horizon, where before he could see only sky. He had to fly it somehow. He had to fly the plane. He had to help himself. The pilot was gone, beyond anything he could do. He had to try and fly the plane. He turned back in the seat facing the front and put his hands still trembling on the control wheel, his feet gently on the rudder pedals. You pulled back on the stick to raise the plane. He knew that from reading. You always pulled back on the wheel. He gave it a tug and it slid back toward him easily, too easily. The plane, with the increased speed from the tilt down, swooped eagerly up and drove Brian's stomach down. He pushed the wheel back in, went too far this time, and the plane's nose went below the horizon and the engine speed increased with the shallow dive. Too much. He pulled back again, more gently this time, and the nose floated up again. Too far, but not as violently as before. Then down a bit too much, and up again as before. Then down a bit too much, and up again, very easily, and the front of the engine cowling settled. When he had it aimed at the horizon, it seemed to be steady. He held the wheel where it was, let out his breath, which he had been holding all this time, and tried to think of what to do next. It was a clear blue sky day with fluffy bits of clouds here and there, and he looked out the window for a moment, hoping to see a town or village, but there was nothing. Just the green of the trees, endless green, and lakes, more and more thickly as the plane flew where. He was flying but did not know where. He had no idea where he was going. He looked at the dashboard of the plane, studied the dials, and hoped to get some help. Hoped to find a compass, but it was all so confusing. A jumble of numbers and lights. One lighted display in the top center of the dashboard said the number 342. Another next to it said 22. Down beneath that were dials with lines that seemed to indicate what the winds were doing, tipping or moving, and one dial with a needle pointing to the number 70, which he only thought, might be the altimeter, the device that told him his height above the ground, or above sea level. Somewhere he had read something about altimeters, but he couldn't remember what or where or anything about them. Slightly to the left and below the altimeter, he saw a small rectangular panel with a lighted dial and 2 knobs. His eyes had passed it over 2 or 3 times before he saw what was written in tiny letters on top of the panel. Transmitter 221 was stamped in the middle, and it hit him. Finally, this was the radio. The radio, of course, he had used the radio. When the pilot had been hit that way, he couldn't bring himself to say that the pilot was dead. Couldn't think it. He had been trying to use the radio. Brian looked at the pilot. The headset was still on his head, turned sideways a bit from his jamming back into the seat, and the microphone switch was clipped to his belt. Brian had to get the headset from the pilot. He had to reach over and get the headset from the pilot, or he would not be able to use the radio or call for help. He had to reach over. His hands began trembling again. He did not want to touch the pilot, did not want to reach for him, but he had to get the radio. He lifted his hands from the wheel, just slightly, and held them, waiting to see what would happen. The plane flew on normally, smoothly. All right, he thought, now to do this thing. He turned and reached for the headset, slid it from the pilot's head, one eye on the plane, waiting for it to dive. The headset came easily, but the microphone switch at the pilot's belt was jammed in, and he had to pull to get it loose. When he pulled, his elbow bumped the wheel and pushed it in, and the plane started down in a shallow dive. Brian grabbed the wheel and pulled it back too hard again, and the plane went through another series of stomach-wrenching swoops up and down before he could get it under control. When things had settled again, he pulled at the mic cord once more and at last jerked the cord free. It took him another second or two to place the headset on its own head and position the small microphone tube in front of his mouth. He had seen the pilot use it. He had seen him depress the switch at his belt, so Brian pushed the switch in and blew into the mic. He heard the sound of his breath in the headset. "Hello? Is there anybody listening to this? Hello?" He repeated it 2 or 3 times and then waited, but heard nothing except his own breathing. Panic came then. He had been afraid, had been stopped with the terror of what was happening, but now panic came, and he began to scream into the microphone, scream over and over, "Help! Somebody help me! I'm in this plane and I don't know. And he started crying with the screams, crying and slamming his hands against the wheel of the plane, causing it to jerk down, then back up. But again, he heard nothing but the sound of his own sobs in the microphone, his own screams mocking him, coming back into his ears. The microphone. Awareness cut into him. He had used a CB radio in his uncle's pickup once. You had to turn the mic switch off to hear anybody else. He reached to his belt and released the switch. For a second, all he heard was the whoosh of the empty airwaves. Then, through the noise and static, he heard a voice. "Whoever is calling on this radio net, I repeat, I release your mic switch. You're covering me. Over." It stopped and Brian hit his mic switch. I hear you. This is me." He released the switch. "Roger, I have you now." The voice was very faint, breaking up. "Please state your difficulty and location and say over to signal end of transmission. Over." Please state my difficulty, Brian thought. God, my difficulty? I am in a plane with a pilot who he can't fly, and I don't know how to fly. Help me, help! He turned his mic off without ending transmission properly. There was a moment's hesitation before the answer. Your signal's breaking up and I lost most of it. Understand, pilot? You can't fly, correct? Over? Brian could barely hear him now. Heard mostly noise and static. That's right, I can't fly. The plane is flying now, but I don't know how much longer. Over. Lost signal. Your location, please. Flight number, location. I don't know my flight number or location. I don't know anything. I told you that. Over. He waited, but there was nothing. Once, for a second, he thought he heard a break in the noise, some part of a word, but it could have been static. 2, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, the plane roared and Brian listened, but no one heard. Then he hit the switch again. I do not know the flight number. My name is Brian Robeson. We left Hampton, New York, headed for the Canadian oil fields to visit my father. I do not know how to fly an airplane. And the pilot, he let go of the mic. His voice was starting to rattle, and he felt as if he might start screaming at any second. He took a deep breath. If there's anybody listening who can help me fly a plane, please answer. Okay, guys, so that's chapter 2, part 1. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this video right here and record part 2. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all soon.